Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 31, released April 1996, and of course discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And this cover looks rather artistic. It's about what's called new game culture, and new game apparently is a mixture of 90s British aesthetics with Japanese aesthetics, which would be embraced by the PlayStation brand and used to sell video games to a more older audience. So the opening paragraph is about how video games used to be played by nerds and only nerds, and now that it was going to tap into the mainstream with the power of NuMedia. Well, we'll find out later more about that. So, Chris Crawford again. What's this? Something about the internet? Let's just continue looking. So the Model 3 is announced, and everybody was amazed at how wonderful Virtua Fighter 3 looked. Problem is, it would take another 2 years before it would become common to see in the arcades, unfortunately. Here we have Durrell looking all shiny. And there's more talk of arcade games, most of these using the Model 2 board, as you can see. Not any really interesting releases announced here. So the late 90s were fairly bad for the arcades. Capcom still making fighting games. Xevious 3 apparently. So yeah, the Nintendo 64 was delayed yet again. This time saying that it would only be released in Japan on April 21st, 1996. So and September 30 in the United States. We see that the memory card slot could be used for other things. Okay, so Power VR, yet another article about some kind of 3D technology for PCs, and they spent 3 pages on this, even though I didn't find it very compelling. This, of course, is compelling news. How Sony decides to ditch Nintendo. They want to make Final Fantasy VII using CD-ROM. So that was quite sad for Nintendo fans. And the setting you can enhance with some extra ROM, which would give you some more RAM to use. And apparently a link up so you can play against each other, but I don't remember anybody using that. Okay, so the CD-ROM finding more uses now as a more multimedia kind of thing, even though I don't think anybody really used it for such things. It would take the personal computer to use the CD as a normal thing before multimedia on the CD would become quite common. I don't know, something about Monty Python. This is kind of silly. Alright. This is kind of hilarious how the Wipeout game, because it has a capital E, would apparently, according to a British tabloid, The Sun, thanks to the letter E, more kids playing Wipeout would be using ecstasy, which is, of course, complete nonsense. And something about Christopher Walken embracing the use of the internet. It'll be very important in the future, this Internet CD-ROM Information Superhighway. Apparently, that's what he said. Okay, so in the mid-90s, people were concerned about what was on the internet. You see Bill Clinton here, and at the time, there was apparently some law concerning the content of the internet, so making it illegal to publish indecent things. I don't think this law ever passed, but we keep seeing things like this happening. Silicon Graphics still making commercials for readers of Edge. Okay, so Chris Crawford has a 2-page essay on interactivity And what he has to say is that there's always been a compromise between the artist and the player when it comes to video games, and that this compromise hurts the abilities of this medium. And his solution is actually to say that we need somebody to grow up with both sides of the story of interactivity and storytelling, and that this one person or these people growing up with these kinds of mindsets would eventually make excellent products. And he also has this interesting story how actually, I mean, as an example, he says it's not that hard actually, because he talks about how a grandpa could tell a story to a child using interactivity, changing the story on the fly. So there's a lot of stuff to chew on, but no clear answers given by Chris Crawford, unfortunately. So, and he himself would struggle very long on this question, is still doing so, 30 years on. Okay, Adeline, the French game makers who made Little Big Planet, talking a lot about the technological differences between Little Big Planet, No Little Big Adventure 1 and 2, and some talk about his new game, their new game, Time Commando, which was kind of like Flashback. And it wasn't a big game, unfortunately. So, and they're talking about just the PlayStation being the safest bet. So more signs that the Saturn would lose the race. Spycraft, that interesting game we saw in previous videos. Okay, another very technical article, this time about the reality synthesizer. So this is a graphics workstation by Silicon Graphics, and apparently it's quite a leap in processing power, being able to make mountains like these. So if you're interested in making 3D graphics in the 90s, you should check out this article. Formula 1, which would become a huge hit on the PlayStation 1, they talk about how the compromise being both an arcade-like game and a realistic game. I like how they give a nod to Geoff Crammond, the guy who made the Grand Prix games, and they say, well, we can't compete with his attention to detail, so instead we'll go for making the game more fun. And yeah, fun it was. So 4 pages on that. Die Hard Trilogy, which is basically 3 games in one for the PlayStation. Not to be confused with Die Hard, the arcade game for the Saturn. And most people preferred this game. And had a racing game, a shooting game, and a beat 'em up, if I recall correctly. Here we see the images of Final Fantasy VII. Not the first ones, but these are pretty close to what the end product was going to be like. So we see here a cloud at a town with a fire. I played this a long time ago. I don't recall that town. We see Aerith and Cloud together in a fight. And yes, the Big Buster Sword. Jumping Flash 2, which would be more of the same. Motortown GP2, same thing. Gun Griffin, a series I haven't followed closely, being shown. Legend of Thor, the action-adventure RPG, which was a mild hit on the Genesis, didn't get that much attention on the Saturn. Conquest of the New World, would this end up becoming, no, it's not Microsoft who makes it. Looks kind of like Age of Empires. I don't remember this game being released. Same thing here with Destiny, which would fully integrate Windows 95. So 2 strategy games for the PC I don't know about. Here's one we do know about, Dungeon Keeper, which would become a huge hit with really nice 3D graphics. And one of the first games made by Bullfrog, which would tease you with the choice between good and evil. Of course, in Dungeon Keeper you are always evil, but then that was kind of a new idea at the time. And then they had Black and White and Fable. Here's Syndicate Wars, a more action-orientated version of Syndicate. We'll get a 9 in Edge. I don't remember hearing much more about that, but I've never been a Syndicate fan. And they also have preview of Theme Hospital, another quality game. I don't think Gene Wars and Creation were released. So Creation seems a bit like Spore, but underwater. And G-Noir seems to be like Populous, but more futuristic. But here's Populous 3 too. But this is Bullfrog at the height of their powers, releasing hit after hit. Amazingly. And after Black and White, things would start to get a bit silly for Peter Molyneux's games. But at the time, he couldn't do anything wrong. Here we have the game called Z. Americans would pronunciate it as Z. And this is actually an interview with the people who made the full motion videos in between. If you've ever played Z, you'll notice it has a lot of personality because these robots, they say all these really cool things. And the movies are quite entertaining. If you ask me, just as good as Blizzard's movies in Warcraft 2. So, a lot of personality in that game. Unfortunately, it was released later than Command & Conquer. By then, everybody was more of a fan of Command & Conquer than anything else. Okay, new game culture. So this would shape Edge too, in their layout and their choice of articles. Very 90s, if you ask me. The 90s didn't have very much authentic culture, but this is something that seemed to stick. And it's heavily influenced by the Sony brand. So Sony tried to make the PlayStation cool by advertising their games and computer at music festivals like Glastonbury and underground clubs. They really had this attitude like, hey, we want 20-year-olds buying our game consoles, so we need to be really hip. We need to get the in crowd into this thing, make it seem like something like a fashion product, and they sure did. And Wipeout was, of course, the biggest one because it had fantastic music, straight from the clubbing scene in England. It had the look, it had the design. There's a company, I can't seem to come up with the name of the company yet, but they designed Wipeout's typeface. You can kind of see it here too. Oh yeah, Designers Republic, that's what they're called. So this looks like a Wipeout poster, but actually it's not. And but here's the Wipeout brand name. You see with the big E standing for ecstasy, I guess. We also see Johnny Bazooka Town was another game that tried to hit into that Japanese aesthetic, but I don't think many people remember that game because it wasn't that very good. So this would coincide with the use of Pentium computers and CD-ROM. People would be burning CDs and finding adult things on the internet. So information technology was pretty cool at the time. The music sounded very digital with the Chemical Brothers and the Prodigy, and so that all, there was a fetishization of the latest technology, and that helped the PlayStation brand. We also see Tekken here. Apparently, they had a remix of their album. I don't remember the game having any good music, but they remixed it to turn it into something to play in clubs. Edge says it's not that good though. So a lot to say about the subject. Here we see the cover of Wipeout. Oh no, it's the Music City apparently. Oh, here's the Enix Internet Entertainment $200,000 prize. It's quite a lot, and later on we'll actually see the winners to make a game. I should look up those games. Speaking of Geoff Crammond, here we have his, I think the height of his powers, Grand Prix 2. Hard to believe that this was made by one person. And at the time, the best looking race game, the best physics, a lot of detail. It was everything you can expect from a Formula 1 game. And so Edge gives it a 9. This is the same person who made Sentinel Returns and Stunt Car Racer. So, and of course The Sentinel. So an amazing coder. Unfortunately, around 2003, his career ended because he couldn't make games by himself anymore to compete. Guardian Heroes, a fantastic side-scrolling beat-em-up with RPG elements, made by Treasure, so you know it's good. Edge says that its graphics look rather 16-bit, probably because it's 2D, but everything else is the pinnacle of beat-em-up games, and gives the game an 8 out of 10, a cult classic, and probably together with Capcom's Dungeons and Dragons beat 'em up game, probably the best ever. Timegate. The people who made Alone in the Dark made this game, and Edge is very disappointed, saying it's very annoying how you constantly die and that there's a lack of suspense. So, it's a shame. Alien Trilogy. More like the game that should have been released for the Jaguar. Yes, you get to play... I think you got to play... No, you always play humans in this game. I'm sorry, I'm getting things confused. But pretty good production. Edge gives it a 7. They say there's a lack of different enemies and the aliens are not that scary at all. Duke Nukem 3D would become the new best 3D shooting game. Quake wasn't released yet, so Duke Nukem 3D lets you jump and look around in 3 dimensions, so that was really cool. The build engine, as it was called, led to a lot of other quality 3D shooting games, and yeah, we all know about Duke Nukem 3D, I bet. It also had some humor and a lot of sexism, unfortunately, but can't deny it was a quality product at the time, and it's understandable that it'd be one of the most 90s games ever made. Big Red Racing, kind of like Stunt Race FX, a lot of different tracks. A lot of polygons. It didn't look very good, but it was just fun to play, and Edge gives it a 7. Didn't have the charm of Nintendo racing games, though. Okay, so speaking of Dungeons & Dragons in the arcade, here we have the other best side-scrolling beat-em-up, if you ask my opinion. And Last Bronx, made by AM3. I don't know much about this fighting game. So, Sega pumping out fighting games. Sailor Man 2, again, I'm not very familiar with side-scrolling shoot-em-ups, but this is Konami's, it's not the same as Nemesis and Gradius. It's like a pseudo-sequel, apparently. Okay. Now we have a funny article, NuMedia. So they review this CD-like game called Quest for Fame. They don't give it a score, though, and they say it's quite entertaining to try out things. There are actually some puzzles, too, so it is a game, technically, but they don't review it like a game. The retro review, unfortunately, is just a bunch of collections. So we have Namco Museum Volume 2, so we have Exevius, and look at Volume 3. What's this? Gap, yes. I've never played that one, Gapless, but I've heard of it. Gradius being released on the PlayStation and Saturn compilation. So what do you get? You get 1, 2, and 3, I guess? Not quite clear. Gradius Deluxe, anyhow. And IREM with their R-Type, Kung Fu, and 10-Yard Fight. Apparently being ported to the 32-bit systems. So you could play those games again. At the time, emulators weren't that prevalent on the internet. And we're almost done. Lots of commercials for working in the industry, like every month. This would last until around 2012. So, okay, the letters. Some concern about Nintendo getting it all wrong. There are two coins to the story. Either you keep the industry alive by only producing quality games, which keeps faith in the customer, something Nintendo did in 1985 in America. They had the same attitude in the mid-90s. Of course, around 1995, the 16-bit systems had a slump. So Nintendo thought, hey, there's too much software, too much subpar things. We need to keep the quality high. The other way of looking at it is saying, no, you got to just let it all be free and just, scattershot. And that way you'll have more good games because more people will be able to add to the pool. And the last PlayStation went for the last way of doing it, and they succeeded. There were a lot of bad games for the PlayStation 1, but there were also quite a lot of good ones. So, and the PlayStation 2 did the same thing, and that's the best-selling console of all time. So, I guess game players have wisened up since the mid-80s, so now they know better what to buy and aren't as fazed by all the different consoles and different games. There's a question about M2. How's that doing? Well, no news recently. One person saying that retro games aren't that good and that Edge shouldn't be paying that much attention to them. But some of them are good, like Super Mario Bros. 3. And one person saying Java's the future because it can be used for all different kind of systems. But Edge says, well, that's more of the case for the internet. But when it comes to consoles, it's a bit harder. And another person says, hey, you got to cover more Mac. I mean, this happens in every other issue. People complaining about lack of Mac coverage, and as you say, well, there are not enough Mac original games. And somebody else complaining about 50 hertz in Europe, something Edge constantly wrote about at the time. Still, I mean, this is the third year of Edge, and they're still talking about 50 hertz and 60 hertz. Okay, so the Q&A. So talk about the resolution of games on Nintendo 64. Again, 60 hertz, will that be normal for Nintendo 64? Well, we had to wait and see, and it turned out that was not the case, so that kind of sucked. But we had fuller screens, though. That did help, but still the games were slower. PlayStation 2, also the case. It wasn't until the Xbox that it became common. GameCube games usually had that choice, and Xbox was always 60 hertz, if I recall correctly. Dreamcast also often gave that choice, so that was really nice. And with PlayStation 3, that would become the standard. Okay. Oh yeah, let's talk about the disc swap, you know, if you could play import games. See, England was always highly into import because they had to wait so long before they could get their American and Japanese games. And unfortunately, no preview. Instead, some kind of contest of sorts for Wipeout gear. They mentioned some really funny manual they found in a PC hard drive, which they printed. And something about Arthur McLean, I think his name was, the guy who made the pool games, and showing off his Ferrari at GTO. Well, apparently he would be picked up by Virgin to make excellent games. Oh yeah, next month is MDK. Shiny's last excellent game, so we'll be looking to the next time. And that was Edge Magazine 31, embracing the new media, and Edge would soon enough change the layout in the magazine. I think this is still mostly the original layout of the magazine, yeah. And you'll see it soon enough. They'll become a bit more funkier, a bit more 90s, and I didn't like it. It looked more commercial to me. So we'll be saying goodbye to the sober look of the original Edge, but that sober look would return later on. So we'll see you then.